and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Seltner in our Washington, D.C. studio. It's good to have you here with us for the weekly launch of the program. One goal of this show is to hold our lawmakers accountable to their pro-life promises. So let's take a look where we stand 1 month into a Trump presidency. On the campaign trail, candidate Trump made the unprecedented move to outline 4 pro-life commitments. In his first week in office, the president made a big step toward his promise to defund Planned Parenthood by reinstating the Mexico City policy. This stops U.S. taxpayer funding of abortion groups overseas. And 1 month in, President Trump has followed through on his promise to nominate a pro-life justice. Trump has nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court. The 49-year-old currently sits on the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Later on in the program, I speak with Utah Senator Mike Lee about what this nomination means for the pro-life movement. But joining me now is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life advocacy group we are teaming up with for this program.
Hooray.
It's good to have you here.
It's great to be here.
So Marjorie, you chaired Trump's pro-life coalition during his campaign. Have you spoken with him since he has taken office?
Yes, I have a couple of times. Near the beginning of the administration, went over to the White House and had a meeting about the Gorsuch nomination. Talked to him on the phone. I've talked to Vice President Pence quite a few times. I think probably the meeting there at the White House was one of the more interesting times that I think I've ever had in D.C. We were kind of all in the Oval Office, and just because he wants to share everything with us, which is such a beautiful way to be.
What did you take away from those conversations in that meeting?
It was a really strong resolve to follow through on his commitment on Gorsuch without question. Also to make sure that he's constantly communicating with the people that will help make that real, because connecting with the Senate, making sure that the grassroots are behind that nomination is vital. He's very serious and he's very warm. And I've found always, and I don't know if it always comes through on TV, but he has a very good sense of humor, which I think if you live in D.C., you better have one, you know?
Or else it'll get to you. So 1 month into his presidency as a pro-life leader, what do you make of the administration so far?
I think all the things that you just listed tell the whole story. The concrete policy commitments that he's following through on, the Supreme Court, which is necessary to uphold any of those, are vital. And frankly, the people that we work with every day, I know the people that you talk to every day, that are in his administration are people that believe this, that also will walk talking the talk during the campaign means you're going to need to walk the walk in the White House, and that's happening.
And we'll be holding him accountable to that. Now, you wrote an op-ed saying Democrat Senator Joe Donnelly from Indiana has a crucial role in nominating Judge Gorsuch. Why is that?
He and a handful of other senators will be determinative in whether the Gorsuch nomination is confirmed or not. And he in particular calls himself a pro-life Democrat. I knew him in the House of Representatives where he really felt he was among top leaders in pro-life Democrats. He really, it's very important that he vote the right way and that a whole handful of others do the same. So all of our grassroots efforts are geared towards communicating that in Indiana and then other states with senators in the same position.
So House Republicans right now are busy on focusing their plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. What will you specifically be looking for in the proposal?
Well, I'm really glad you're asking because it's really easy to miss this. There's so many things that are happening and it's vital. When Obamacare was originally passed, there was no amendment keeping our money out of the abortion business. This new repeal and replace movement going in through the reconciliation bill has to have language that keeps our money out of the abortion business because, as we know, abortion is not health care. So we got to watch for that and make sure everybody knows what we think.
We'll continue to do that. I do want to show a new advertisement you guys started running. Let's take a look.
What is Planned Parenthood really about? Breast cancer screenings?
We do not have mammogram machines at our health centers.
Prenatal care?
No, we don't do prenatal services. I mean, it's called Planned Parenthood. I know it's kind of deceiving.
Now, this ad ran during Fox and Friends and MSNBC's Morning Joe. What's the strategy there?
Well, we really think it's important to really meet these senators and congressmen where they are, and where they often are is watching Morning Joe. They're coming in their cars, so we have a radio show. It's a really human approach. Let's actually lobby them where they are actually watching news. This is in addition to the thousands of calls coming in from the states that are from their constituents, but that message is really breaking through. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the Hill that they're actually seeing it.
going to the people with this message to defund Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you.
Thank you.
Now for the call to action segment of the program. On each show, we'll give you a concrete way you can be involved in the pro-life movement. This week, we want to continue to put the pressure on our lawmakers to defund Planned Parenthood. Here is how you can get involved. Log onto your computer or smartphone device and go to www.sba-list.org/defundpp. It's simple. Once you get to the website, you can add your name to the petition to say defund Planned Parenthood now. It takes less than a minute. And we want to encourage you to share this information with your friends and family on social media. Once again, it's www.sba-list.org/defundpp. Let's make sure our pro-life message is heard. As mentioned earlier in the program, President Trump has nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court. Gorsuch is described as a constitutionalist and supports the constitutional right to life. Utah Senator Mike Lee is an expert on that founding document. He's even written a book on it. I recently sat down with Senator Lee to talk about what Gorsuch's judicial style would mean for the pro-life movement. Senator Lee, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. During the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump promised to appoint pro-life justices to the Supreme Court. Since becoming president of the United States, he has appointed Judge Neil Gorsuch. Is Gorsuch that pro-life judge that Trump promised?
You don't write a book about euthanasia, especially the type of book written by Judge Gorsuch, unless you have a profound respect for the dignity of human life. And that's something that we all care very much about, is making sure that our laws and our legal system, including our judicial system, pay due respect for the dignity, the sanctity of human life.
Gorsuch is described as a constitutionalist. What does that mean, especially when it comes to protecting life?
Okay, so a constitutionalist, sometimes this phrase will refer to someone being an originalist, which means that the judge in question wants to interpret the Constitution based on what the words actually say. And to understand what the words mean is willing to go through the hard work and effort of going back and reviewing how the words used in the Constitution were understood at the time they were drafted, at the time they were put into the Constitution and ratified. And that's a quality that Judge Gorsuch has, and that's a quality that is important to conservatives, and it's a quality that should be important to all Americans, because what it means is that we'll reserve the courts not for policy making, but for interpreting what the law and the Constitution actually say, what the words actually mean. That's what we all want. That's what we all should want.
That brings me to my next question. You are currently in the legislative branch, but you have a deep background in law. Your father, Rex Lee, was Solicitor General under President Reagan. Your brother is on Utah's Supreme Court. You are a lawyer and clerked for Justice Samuel Alito. So can you break down the role that you have now as a senator in the legislative branch when it comes to protecting life, and how that compares to the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, when it comes to protecting life?
Well, it's our job to make policy. It's not supposed to be the court's job to make policy. Within the realm of policy making enjoyed by Congress, we're limited by separation of powers principles and also by federalism principles. When we follow the Constitution properly, we see that most decisions regarding most of our laws are actually made at the state and local level. They shouldn't be made federally. And we also see that law itself needs to be made by the political branches of government, by the executive and legislative branch, whether at the federal or state level, depending on the issue. So one of my jobs is first and foremost to figure out who's the decision maker. Is this a policy decision? If so, it should be left to the political branches. And secondly, at which level of government should this law be made? Is it something that's articulated in Article 1, Section 8 or elsewhere in the Constitution as a federal responsibility? If not, then it should be left to the states.
You have been outspoken about the need to protect Americans' conscience, rights, and taxpayer dollars from funding abortions. You introduced legislation to make the Mexico City policy permanent law to stop taxpayer funding of abortion overseas. But what about here at home? What efforts are being made to ensure that high protections will be included in any plan to repeal and replace Obamacare?
First of all, with regard to Obamacare, we're doing everything we can to undo this law, which has made health care more expensive, less affordable, less accessible to the American people, and has exacted an unduly large burden on America's middle class. In December 2015, we passed a law that would repeal Obamacare. And that was passed by a Republican House and a Republican Senate. We sent it to President Obama. He vetoed it. There's no reason why we shouldn't pass a repeal bill that is at least as aggressive in repealing Obamacare as what we passed in December 2015. So that's what I've been advocating, is let's go back to that. Let's put that bill on the table and let's get Obamacare repealed, and then we can start dealing with what comes next in an iterative process, one that can involve the American people through their elected representatives.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
In more news, two major actresses make a Planned Parenthood fashion statement on the Oscars red carpet this past week, showing off the cozy relationship Hollywood has with the abortion provider. Emma Stone, who took home the Academy Award for Best Actress, wore this Planned Parenthood pin on her dress down the red carpet. And actress Dakota Johnson, who stars in the 50 Shades of Grey movie series, put the Planned Parenthood symbol on her purse. The largest abortion provider tweeted in approval. Some encouraging news from Montana. Montana's Senate moves forward on a bill that effectively bans all abortions after 24 weeks of pregnancy. If a woman's life is in danger after 24 weeks, doctors are required to deliver the baby and try to save its life. But even if this pro-life measure gets final approval in the Montana Senate and House, it will likely be vetoed by Democrat Governor Steve Bullock. In Florida, women who have had abortions can sue abortionists under a bill moving through the state's House. The bill allows women to sue for physical or emotional injuries stemming from their abortions. It's unclear if the bill will pass since there's no companion bill in the Florida Senate. Catholic bishops in Virginia condemned Democrat Governor Terry McAuliffe after he vetoed his state's defunding Planned Parenthood bill. The bill directed funding to other health clinics that provide comprehensive health care services. Something worth mentioning, the Virginia Bureau of Watchdog.org claims McAuliffe's campaign received nearly $2 million from Planned Parenthood in 2013. And Washington, D.C. becomes the 7th U.S. jurisdiction to legalize assisted suicide after Congress failed to block the so-called Death with Dignity Act. To help untangle the myths behind assisted suicide, we turn to tonight's expert panel. Lucia Selecchia is a professor of law at the Catholic University of America. She testified in opposition to the so-called Death with Dignity bill at the D.C. City Council. And Genevieve Plaster is a senior policy analyst for the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Thank you both for being here. So, Lucia, first off, from a legal standpoint, what concerns you about this specific piece of legislation in D.C.?
A good deal. And my primary objection to it, of course, is the moral one. So I don't want to create the impression that fixing these problems will make the statute okay. But I think it's important to counter the narrative that these statutes build in protections, because those protections are meaningless. So when a patient accesses this so-called death with dignity, that is triggered by a determination of two doctors, neither of whom really needs to know the patient very well at all, who believe the patient will pass away within 6 months. That is not an exact science, and it does not require that anybody knows the patient. The written request has to be witnessed by two people, and one of them could be somebody who stands to benefit from the person's death, someone who will inherit under a will or a life insurance policy.
That person will have a say in whether or not
as a witness to say this person is competent and they're not being coerced.
Wow. Okay.
Once the drugs then are prescribed, they are in the home and there are no safeguards about where they're stored, where they're kept. And so you can see somebody who has them for what they believe will be peace of mind, has a difficult day, and takes those drugs without really thinking it through. When the person does pass away, there's a requirement that the death certificate be falsified. And so the death certificate cannot record that the cause of death was the ingestion of the drugs.
What does it say?
It says whatever the disease was that prompted the person to request the drugs. And so you have to be skeptical of any statute that requires you to lie on a public document.
Absolutely. Genevieve, can you put this into perspective for us? How many more states are considering assisted suicide in 2017?
Sure. So far already, we're already in February, March, and there's about 24 states that are considering legalizing assisted suicide. And again, the 24, that's a lot. Half the country is considering institutionalizing suicide, prescribed by a doctor as a legal medical option.
What about on the global realm? Is this part of a greater trend that we're seeing?
Yeah, so, in the 80s and further back, we have the Netherlands and Switzerland and a number of European countries have assisted suicide and euthanasia laws that have allowed for really egregious abuses that have reached us here as we're providing for a slippery slope of a number of different kinds of coercions and abuses.
Now, one argument that's often used to legalize assisted suicide is, well, we don't want anyone to feel pain. So is that what we're seeing? Are people opting for assisted suicide to avoid pain?
I think what we're seeing when people do studies about who actually chooses this option, it's not fear of physical pain. It is fear of loss of autonomy. It's fear of being a burden to other people, and it's fear of not being able to participate in activities that were previously enjoyed. Those are the top three.
Wow.
And fear of pain doesn't even make the top five.
Wow.
Right, and just to add to that, we have the most recent annual report from Oregon, which they were the first state in the United States to legalize assisted suicide. So they have 19 years of experience of people dying in Oregon under assisted suicide laws. And from their most recent annual report, we know that half of the people who have successfully taken their lives under this law felt like they were a burden to their family and friends. That was one of their driving primary end-of-life concerns.
I think one of the similarities between the debate on assisted suicide with abortion is this idea of choice. And people should have a choice for abortion, or if they want to opt into assisted suicide. How do you respond to those claims?
We're looking at people who are in a very difficult situation. All of these cases are tragedies. There's somebody who is facing death, perhaps a painful and difficult death, and we don't look at, there's no requirement that there be a depression screening. So the idea that these are free choices, I think we also have to ask ourselves what we believe about choice and autonomy. And there are many decisions that we're not allowed to make because they're bad for ourselves, for society. And so saying choice is problematic because it allows people to make decisions that don't just harm themselves, but bring in a medical community that is now part of this culture of death. People who we look to as healing doctors are now pulled into it. The conscience protections are currently in the statute, but I'm skeptical of them, and they don't protect pharmacists who may have a problem. So this idea of choice really is a false claim in a lot of respects.
And there are so many euphemisms on this topic. Death with dignity, compassion, and choices. Is truth being distorted here? What is the truth?
I mean, definitely in terms of being compassionate, the most primary and basic and deepest role of medicine is to care, to heal, to be with the patient, to have compassion is to suffer with, and literally with physician-assisted suicide, you're institutionalizing, you're allowing for basically abandoning a very sick patient or someone who has fallen through the cracks, who may have a mental. Maybe mentally depressed, but there's no requirement that would catch them for counseling. So it's really concerning. And to that point, we know that from a 2008 British Medical Journal, there was a study done that looked at patients who had requested assisted suicide in Oregon, and it found that 20% of these patients who requested the lethal drugs were clinically depressed, separate from the requirements of the law. The study found, the study brought in their own doctors and found that they were clinically depressed and were able to die still under the law.
Which points to the concerns with no depression screenings and everything like that. And just remember, every age, every stage of life has great dignity, Thank you both for being here with us and providing some clarity on this issue.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
When we come back, see how the Little Sisters of the Poor are passing on the torch to young people to build up the culture of life. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Seltner. In this week's Speak Out segment, we want to point to a recent pro-abortion piece featured in Teen Vogue. The fashion and celebrity magazine created a slideshow called What to Get a Friend Post-Abortion, Pins, Poetry, and more. The author writes a post-abortive friend will need her spirits lifted, writing, quote, "She will need you not because the act itself is so terrible, but because sometimes the world can be." Gift ideas include a girl power baseball cap, a poetry book, and a Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg coloring book. Students for Life of America released a video response to the gift guide featuring a pro-life high schooler named Autumn. Take a listen.
Teen Vogue, you should be held accountable for this disgusting and disrespectful article. You trivialized an issue that leaves millions of women struggling every day. Such a blasé approach hurts women who regret their abortions. It minimizes their pain.
The pro-life video response has already racked up tens of thousands of views. According to Media Research Center's calculations, Teen Vogue has pushed abortion 63 times this year alone. One thing that's especially alarming, this article directly targets teens, normalizing abortion to young girls who may not even be old enough to vote, drink, or drive. Teen Vogue did get one thing right, though. If your friend has gotten an abortion, you will need to be there for her. But that does not mean making light of the situation and getting her a gag gift. It means you need to love her, listen to her, and tell her that you are sorry for her loss. And there are so many resources available for post-abortive women. If you have gotten an abortion, go to hopeafterabortion.com. You will be welcomed and loved and surrounded by a support system during what is undoubtedly a difficult time. And remember, there is something you can do to combat today's culture of death by following this week's call to action. Go to www.sba-list.org/defundpp. Sign the petition to tell our lawmakers we want Planned Parenthood defunded. As we turn to the pro-life focus segment of the show, there may be no more worthy group to feature than the Little Sisters of the Poor. The women religious serve the elderly's neediest in over 30 countries, but now the Little Sisters are turning to the young as they take on a new initiative.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Donning their signature gray habits, the Little Sisters of the Poor are champions of care for the elderly who need them most.
Oh, wonderful. You were a hard-working mother, weren't you? Yeah.
They've been in the spotlight recently for facing off against the Obama administration in the nation's highest court. The sisters say they cannot in good conscience allow their health care plans to provide contraceptive services, something that's required by the Affordable Care Act. Their Supreme Court case was sent back down to the lower courts last year.
Our case, it's not completely resolved. So I would just ask anybody who hears this interview to continue to pray.
Inspired by the court's hopeful action, the Little Sisters are now taking on a new cause with a giant mission: bring the young and old together to build up the culture of life.
We haven't had a meeting of Youth and Aged in a little while.
Sister Constance Veet teamed up with Janice Clark, a musician and consecrated virgin, to create Youth and Aged for Life as a response to some disturbing life trends.
Euthanasia is becoming more and more accepted, and I thought how interesting to turn that on its head, to say no, we don't need euthanasia. We need Youth and Aged coming together in a partnership of love and prayer for a culture of life.
The Youth and Aged meetings go like this. The young and old join together to hear pro-life updates.
The DC Council passed assisted suicide by 11-2. It wasn't even close.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Pray the rosary.
and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Sing. And finally, to socialize. The group's founders say that intergeneration interaction is key for our culture.
I think today, because families live so dispersed across the country, you know, a lot of kids might not have regular contact with their own grandparents, and so they don't really have an experience of older people.
The children need the elderly, and the elderly need the children, and the human family needs them as bookends. They're the bookends of the family, they're the bookends of life.
It's a life-giving truth they want to spread far and wide, so they put Clark's musical gifts to good use.
The time has come to take a stand.
And produced a music video featuring some unlikely stars.
Even just the idea of the elderly starring in a music video makes people smile and laugh. They're like, what?
Clark believes the Little Sisters of the Poor are the perfect carriers of the cause.
I see the home of the Little Sisters of the Poor as kind of a headquarters, a school of love.
For it is in the weak that the Little Sisters see a message of strength.
We hope that this effort will bring about as well to just witness to people that every human life is sacred, that everybody is a somebody, that everyone is a someone loved by God infinitely and eternally.
The Youth and Aged for Life initiative is currently based in Washington, D.C. with more locations in the works. If you'd like to learn more, visit littlesistersofthepoor.org/youth-aged-for-life. That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. You can reach us anytime at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. I look forward to seeing you here again next week and every week from here on out. Life is a gift. God bless.